Chapter 1. A Quiet Man from Kentucky. Abraham Lincoln sat alone by the fire. The flames moved slowly, soft and warm. Outside, the night was cold. The wind whispered through the trees. But inside, the room was quiet. Too quiet. He held a small book in his hands. But he wasn't reading. His eyes looked at the fire, but his mind was far away. He was thinking about the past. "I was just a boy," he whispered. "A poor boy in Kentucky." He remembered the log cabin. It was small, made of wood and hard work. There was no floor, just dirt. No school, no books. But there was a fire, and a mother who loved him. "She died when I was 9, he said, almost to himself. His voice was soft. "She gave me everything she could. Then she was gone." Lincoln closed his eyes. He saw himself, a thin boy, sitting near a fire, just like this one. Reading by candlelight, his fingers cold, his eyes tired. But he kept reading. Reading was his door to the world. Now, many years later, he was not in a cabin. He was in the White House, president of a broken country. The United States was at war with itself. The South had left. They called it secession, but Lincoln called it something else. "Rebellion," he said, his jaw tight. "They are breaking the Union." They wanted to keep slavery. Men, women, and children owned like animals, forced to work, not free. The North was different. Many there believed slavery was wrong, but not everyone wanted a war. Lincoln wanted peace, but he also wanted justice. He stood up and walked to the window. Dark clouds covered the sky. The moon was gone. Only shadows moved in the garden. He sighed. "How did we come to this?" he whispered. He pressed his hand to the glass. "I wanted to hold this nation together, not tear it apart." Voices filled his mind. "Free the slaves!" one voice shouted. "Don't touch slavery," said another. "End this war. Fight until the South returns." So many voices, so many people watching him, waiting, judging. He sat back down. The fire cracked. A log broke in half. Lincoln stared at the flames. They danced like memories. He thought about his father, hard, cold, silent, about his mother, gentle and warm, and about the young man he once was, tall, awkward, full of dreams. What would that young man say now? Would he be proud or afraid? Lincoln didn't know. He opened the book in his hands. It was the Bible. Worn, old, full of underlined verses. His finger touched a passage. "A house divided against itself cannot stand." He had said those words once, before he became president. But now, they felt more real than ever. This house, this country, is falling, he said, and I must find a way to hold it up. The fire began to fade. The room grew darker. Only a soft red light remained. Lincoln didn't move. He felt the silence in his bones. His thoughts were heavy, like stones. He thought about the people of the South, not just the leaders, the soldiers, but the slaves. He had never seen slavery up close, but he had read stories and heard voices, quiet voices, that said, "Help us, please." He wanted to help. But how? How could he end slavery and not lose the war? How could he keep the country together when half of it wanted to leave? He looked down at his hands. They were big, rough, made for work, not soft hands, not rich hands. I am not like other presidents, he thought. I am not perfect. I am not even sure I am strong enough for this. But something inside him said, "You must try. You must keep going." A knock came at the door. "Mr. President," said a voice, "it's late. You should rest." "I know," Lincoln replied. But he didn't move. He looked once more at the fire. "I did not choose this war," he said quietly, "but I will not run from it." He stood, tall, tired, strong. Tomorrow, he would make decisions, hard ones, but tonight, he would remember who he was. A quiet man from Kentucky. A boy who read by candlelight. A man who still believed in freedom. Chapter 2. The War Begins. "They fired the first shot, Mr. President." The words felt cold, sharp, like a knife through quiet air. Lincoln stood still. He didn't speak. He looked at the young officer standing in front of him. "Where?" Lincoln asked. "Fort Sumter, sir, South Carolina." The war had begun. Outside, the morning sun was rising. But inside the White House, everything felt dark. Lincoln turned to the window. The trees were green. Birds sang in the garden. But it didn't feel like spring. It felt like the end of something. He had tried to stop this. He had spoken, written, waited, hoped. But the South had chosen war. They wanted to break away. They wanted to build their own country, one where slavery stayed. Lincoln could not allow that. He whispered to himself, "This is not just about land or power. It's about what we are, who we are." A knock came at the door. His secretary entered. "Sir, people are gathering outside." Lincoln nodded. Soon he would have to speak. To the press, to the people, to the world. But for a moment, he just stood there. He thought about the soldiers, young men, farmers, teachers, sons. They were already marching, some with fear, some with fire in their hearts. Mothers cried at train stations. Fathers shook hands one last time. And Lincoln, he stayed behind. He sat at his desk that night, alone. The candlelight flickered. Shadows moved across the room. He picked up his pen and began to write, not orders, not speeches, letters, to the mother who lost her only son. His pen moved slowly. To the wife who waits. To the boy who wants to serve but is too young. He wrote with care, with heart. He wrote because he could not sleep. He wrote because he had no peace. He leaned back in his chair. The war was real now. There would be blood. There would be pain. There would be loss. And he would carry all of it. He remembered what someone once told him. Mr. Lincoln, you look like a man who is already tired. He smiled sadly. Yes, he thought, I am tired. But he also knew this. He had a job to do. That night, the sounds of drums echoed in the streets. Men were marching. Women waved goodbye. Some people cheered. Others prayed. Some believed this war would end quickly, that it would be easy. But Lincoln knew better. He looked at a map on his wall. So many states, so much land, so many lives, about to change. He felt something deep in his chest. Not fear, not anger, something else. Responsibility. He spoke to his advisors the next day. Gentlemen, he said, we are at war. Some nodded. Some looked away. Lincoln looked each of them in the eye. This will not be fast. It will not be clean. But we must stay strong. They listened. But Lincoln could see it. Even they were afraid. Later, a messenger handed him a list. Names of the dead from the first battle. He read each one. He said each name out loud. He paused, closed his eyes. These are not just names, he thought. They were someone's child, someone's love. Outside, it began to rain. Light at first, then harder, like the sky was crying. Lincoln watched the drops hit the window. He thought about his own sons, and about the families across the country, both north and south. How many more will we lose? He asked quietly. No one answered. He walked to the fire, stared into the flames. They reminded him of that day in the cabin, long ago, back when he was just a boy. He remembered his mother's voice. Software. Kind. She had always said, "Do what is right, Abe, even when it is hard." And now, everything was hard. But he still knew what was right. He turned from the fire, his face full of sorrow and strength. "We fight now," he whispered. "So one day, we don't have to." Chapter 3. A House Divided. The moon was high in the sky. The garden was quiet. Cold wind moved through the trees. Abraham Lincoln walked alone, slowly, step by step, deep in thought. His hands were behind his back. His coat moved with the breeze, but he didn't notice. His mind was somewhere else. He was thinking, remembering, a speech he gave years ago. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Those were his words. Strong words. Brave words. But now, they felt different. This house, the United States, was not just divided. It was broken. The South had left. They had created their own country, with their own president, their own flag, and they were willing to kill to protect it. The North stayed. They fought to keep the Union together. But under it all, deeper than politics, was one question: slavery. Lincoln looked up at the dark sky. He whispered to himself, "Why must one man own another? Why is that still allowed in this land?" He thought of the slaves in the South, men working under the sun, women holding crying babies, children born in chains, and none of them free. But he also thought of something else: the war. He couldn't forget the war. If he tried to free the slaves now, would the war become worse? Would more people die? Would he lose the support of the North? "Can I end slavery," he asked, "and still win the war?" The question sat heavy in the air. He stopped walking. His eyes fell on a rose bush. The flowers were gone. Only thorns remained. He remembered what people had said about his speech back then. Too bold. Too dangerous. Don't talk about slavery. But he had said it anyway. Because he believed it. Now, it was no longer just a speech. It was real. This house, this country, was falling. He sat down on a wooden bench. His hands trembled. Not from cold, but from the weight of the decision he would soon have to make. He could not stop thinking about the lives at stake. White lives, black lives, free men, enslaved people, soldiers, children, all of them, watching, waiting. He closed his eyes. He saw fields, chains, smoke from battles, letters from mothers, tears on the faces of soldiers, and he asked again, "How can I save this house?" He heard footsteps behind him. "Mr. President?" a voice said softly. It was his secretary. "Yes?" "They're waiting for you, sir, in your office." Lincoln nodded. "Tell them I'll be there in a moment." The man left. Lincoln stayed a little longer. He needed just one more minute. One more minute to think, to feel, to search inside his heart. He whispered, "I was not elected to destroy, but I was also not elected to watch evil grow." He stood up. His shadow stretched across the grass. He walked back toward the White House, toward the light, toward the people who waited for him. Inside, men argued. Some wanted him to act. "Free the slaves now," they said. Others warned him. "It will divide us more. The border states will turn against us." But Lincoln listened and said very little. He had learned something in life. Sometimes the loudest voice is the one inside. Later that night, alone in his study, Lincoln took out a small piece of paper. He wrote only one line. "A just cause must become a clear cause." He looked at it and smiled. Yes, the war was about the Union. But more than that, it was about justice. And soon, the world would know. Chapter 4. Voices in the Dark. It was late. The White House was quiet. Too quiet. Abraham Lincoln sat in his study, alone. Only a single candle burned beside him. Its flame danced like a nervous thought. Outside, the city slept. But Lincoln did not. He couldn't. Because at night, the voices came. They weren't real voices, not out loud, but they filled his head, filled his heart. "Free the slaves, Mr. Lincoln. Do it now. What are you waiting for? They are human beings. They deserve freedom." The voices were strong, passionate, right. But then came the others. "Leave the South alone. You'll lose the border states. Don't go too far, Abe. This war is about saving the Union, not about freeing slaves." Lincoln closed his eyes. He leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. The candle flickered. The flame almost died. He felt tired. Tired in a way that sleep could not fix. His country was at war. His people were angry. And his own cabinet, his closest men, were fighting with each other. One wanted faster action. One warned of danger. Another said, "Do nothing. Just wait." But Lincoln couldn't wait forever. He opened a drawer, took out a letter he had written that morning. Not an official one. Just a letter to an old friend. He looked at the words again. Sometimes, he had written, I wish I had never been born in this time. His pen had paused there before he added more. But if I was put here for a reason, then I must try to serve it. He folded the letter, placed it back inside the drawer, and let out a long, quiet breath. What was that reason? Why him? He had not come from power. He had no money, no fine education, just books, hard work, and a heart that wanted to do right. So why now? Why this war? Why this pain? He looked up. The shadows on the wall moved. They looked like people, like faces, and in his mind, the voices returned. He saw a mother crying, a slave mother, holding her child. She said, Mr. Lincoln, help us. He saw a soldier bleeding in a field. The soldier asked, Is this war really for freedom? He saw a Southern farmer, a simple man, afraid. Don't take my way of life, the man said. Don't destroy us. So many people, so many hopes and fears. Lincoln could hear them all, and he had no easy answers. He stood up, walked to the window. The moon was bright. The stars looked cold. He placed his hand on the glass. The city was still. But the war was alive. He whispered to the night, I don't know if I am the right man for this job, but I am the man who has it. So I must find the right way. He thought again of the slaves, of the chains, the fear, the silence of their suffering. He also thought of the nation. Would freeing them tear the country apart? Would it push more states into the arms of the enemy? He pressed his forehead to the glass. I don't want more blood, he said. But what is worse, blood or injustice? The question hurt his heart. A knock at the door broke the silence. It was a guard. Mr. President, it's late. Is there anything you need? Lincoln turned. No, thank you. Just thinking. The guard nodded and left. Lincoln walked back to his desk. He sat down slowly. He looked at the candle. Still burning. Still holding on. Just like him. Inside, something began to grow. Very small. Very quiet. But real. A feeling. Not peace. Not yet. But purpose. I was not made for comfort, he whispered. I was made for this mission. He didn't say it proudly. He said it like a man who understands what it means. To to carry the weight of history. The voices would keep coming. He knew that. But deep inside, one voice was rising above the rest, his own. And it said, "Do what is right, even if it costs everything." Chapter 5. The Letter from a Slave. It was a gray morning. Rain touched the windows of the White House. Soft, steady, quiet. Abraham Lincoln sat at his desk. He was tired. Another night without sleep. Papers covered the table. Letters from generals. Reports from battles. Lists of the dead. But one letter was different. It was small, written on thin, wrinkled paper. The ink was faded, the words shaky. His secretary placed it gently on the desk. "This came by special mail," he said, "from the north, a man named Joshua." Lincoln looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked it up. He opened the letter slowly and began to read. "Mr. Lincoln, my name is Joshua. I was born a slave, but I ran away. I am free now, in body, but my soul is still waiting. I thank God for you. I thank God for every word you say about freedom. If you free the others, if you break their chains, I will fight for you. I will die for you." Lincoln stopped. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stared at the words. The room was silent, except for the sound of the rain. He read it again, then again. He folded the letter with care, held it in both hands, and closed his eyes. In his mind, he saw Joshua, not clearly, but he imagined him. A man with strong hands, tired eyes, skin marked by labor, but standing tall. Free, but not yet whole. Lincoln opened his eyes, and suddenly the room felt smaller, heavier, full of meaning. This letter was not just from one man. It was from millions. Millions who had no voice, no vote, no freedom. But they had hope. Hope in him. He stood up, walked slowly to the fireplace. He held the letter above the flames, not to burn it, but to warm his cold hands. The heat touched his skin. But it was the letter that touched his heart. He thought of the other voices he had heard, from the cities, from Congress, from the army. So many people had opinions, arguments, fears. But this was different. This was truth. Pure, simple, real. He remembered something his mother once said. When a person asks for help with an honest heart, you must listen. He nodded. I hear you, Joshua, he whispered. "I hear you." He walked to the window. Rain still fell. People rushed down the streets, coats pulled tight. But Lincoln only saw one man standing in the rain, waiting to be free, waiting to fight, waiting for him to decide. What is freedom? Lincoln asked himself. Is it just words on a paper? Or is it something you fight for, even if it breaks the world in half? He thought about the soldiers, white men, black men, fighting together, dying together, and still, slavery lived. That was the truth. The war had started to save the Union, but now it had to become something more. It had to be a fight for freedom. He went back to his desk, placed the letter in a small box. Inside that box were other letters, private ones, letters that meant something. But Joshua's letter was different. This one might change everything. Later that night, Lincoln lit another candle. He sat down, took out paper, and began to write. Not to Joshua, but to himself. There comes a time when a leader must act. Not for power, not for praise, but for what is right. The war will continue, but now it will have a new purpose. Not only to save the Union, but to free the soul of this nation. He signed it with his name, folded it, and placed it under Joshua's letter. Then he blew out the candle. And in the dark, he smiled, not because the war was over, not because peace was near, but because the mission was clear. Chapter 6. The Decision. The hallway was empty. The floor creaked beneath his boots. Each step was slow, heavy. Abraham Lincoln walked alone. One hand held his hat. The other shook, just a little. He stopped at the door to his office, took a deep breath, then opened it. The room was waiting. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him. The sound echoed. Click. He was alone now, just him and history. He walked to the desk, the same desk where he had signed letters to mothers, written to generals, planned the war. But today was different. On the desk was a single sheet of paper, the Emancipation Proclamation, the document that would change everything. The paper was white, clean, still. But the meaning inside it was fire. Lincoln looked at it. He didn't sit down right away. He just stood there, staring. His hand touched the back of the chair. Then, Slowly, he sat. The chair creaked. The clock ticked on the wall. Each second louder than the last. Tick, tick, tick. He reached for the pen. His fingers touched the wood. Smooth, familiar, but today it felt heavier. He picked it up, and then his hand began to shake. He held it still, waited. The shaking stopped, but he did not write, not yet. He closed his eyes. He saw the chains, the scars, the broken families, the silence of slavery. He saw Joshua's letter. The words burned into his heart. If you free us, I will fight for you. I will die for you. He opened his eyes and looked at the paper once more. He thought of the critics, the angry voices, the newspapers that called him a fool, a tyrant, a destroyer of peace. He thought of the war, still burning. He thought of the people he might lose, the border states, the soldiers who didn't want to fight for freedom, only for union. And then he thought of the promise that all men are created equal, the promise that freedom is not a gift, but a right. He whispered, "If I do not sign this, what is all this blood for?" His hand touched the page. The pen met the paper. Still, he paused. The clock ticked louder now. Tick, tick, tick. And then he began. One letter at a time. Slowly, carefully, his name, written in full. Abraham Lincoln. He placed the pen down, sat back in the chair, let out a long breath. "It is done," he whispered. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Leaves danced across the garden. Clouds floated above the city, somewhere far away. A man stood in a field. His wrists were cut from the chains. His back bore the marks of the whip. But now he looked up and smiled. He didn't have the paper in his hands. He didn't see the president sign it. But he felt it, in his bones, in his soul. Something had changed. Freedom had been named. Back in the White House, Lincoln stood. He looked at the paper once more. It sat there, quiet, and full of power. He walked to the window and looked out over the city. He saw lights in windows. He imagined people talking, laughing, praying. He knew some would cheer, others would curse, but no one would forget. The war was not over. The fight had only changed, but now it had a deeper meaning, a truer purpose. Lincoln spoke to the night. Software, steady, sure. This is not just a war for land. It is a war for souls. And in that moment, he felt the weight lift. Not all of it, but enough to take the next step. He blew out the candle and walked into the dark, not afraid, not alone, but with a mission that now had a name. Freedom. Chapter 7. The Storm After Freedom. The news spread like fire in dry grass. The slaves are free. The words traveled fast, across cities, through farms, into churches, homes, and army camps. Some people shouted with joy. Others shouted in anger. The country, already broken by war, now shook again. Lincoln stood at the window. He watched the people gather in the street below. Some waved flags, some sang, some held signs with his name, but others shouted, "You will destroy this country. You went too far." The war was for Union, not for slaves. He listened. He didn't answer, but inside, he felt it. A storm was coming, not of wind or rain, but of voices, of fear, of change. In the South, slave owners were furious. They called him a tyrant. They said he had no right. Some burned the paper. Some swore to fight harder. But the slaves, they heard a different sound. The sound of hope. Men and women ran from the fields. Some dropped their tools and walked away. Some knelt on the ground and wept. One man stood tall and said, "I knew this day would come." Another whispered, "Thank you, God, thank you." Far from the cities, in quiet corners of the land, chains were broken, doors opened, and the sky felt wider. But freedom came with fire. In the North, some people grew cold, even friends of Lincoln. Newspapers called him reckless. Rich men pulled their support. Old allies turned away. "Let the South go," they said. "Freedom isn't worth this much war." One man, once close to Lincoln, said loudly, "You just made things worse. You'll never bring this country back together?" Lincoln heard those words. They cut like glass. He sat in his office that night, alone. No letters, no speeches, just silence. He stared at the fireplace. The flames were low, and in the quiet, he asked himself, "Did I make the right choice?" He thought about the soldiers, cold, hungry, far from home. Would they still fight? Would they still believe in him, in this cause? And then, a letter arrived. It was short, simple. "Mr. President, I am a free man now. I have joined the army. I will wear the uniform with pride. I fight not just for the North. I fight for freedom. Lincoln held the letter in his hands, and something rose inside him. Not pride, not victory, something older, softer, stronger. Hope. Soon, more letters came. From soldiers, from families, from black men ready to fight. Thousands joined the army, marched with heads held high, trained beside white soldiers. They sang songs of freedom, carried rifles and dreams. In battle, they proved their courage. In pain, they showed their strength. In death, they gave their all. Lincoln watched, listened, learned, and he understood. This war had changed. It was not just a war for land. It was a war for the soul of the nation. He stood before his cabinet. Gentlemen in dark suits, cold faces, careful words. He looked at them and said, "Let the world see what this country stands for." Silence followed, but one man nodded, then another, then more. Lincoln walked through a military camp weeks later. He saw the new faces, black soldiers standing tall, proud, ready. One young man saluted him. Lincoln nodded. The boy smiled. He remembered Joshua, his letter, his promise. "If you free us, I will fight for you." Now, they were fighting. And not just for him. They were fighting for something bigger than all of them. Freedom, justice, a new beginning. Back in the White House, Lincoln lit a candle, watched the flame. He thought about the angry crowds, the lost friendships, the pain still ahead. But he also thought of something else. A chain falling to the ground. A hand raised in salute. A voice singing in the dark. He smiled, just a little, and whispered, "This was worth it." Chapter 8. The Cost of War. The ground was red, not from paint, not from autumn leaves, from blood. Blood in the grass, blood in the mud, blood in the hands of young men, too young to die. The war was worse now. Battles came faster. Death came louder. Every day, more letters arrived. Lincoln read them in silence. "My son is dead. My husband is gone. Why, Mr. President? Why?" He had no answers, only pain. One morning, he visited a hospital. Rows of beds. Rows of faces. Boys with bandaged eyes. Men missing arms. Young soldiers with no legs. No smiles. The air smelled like smoke and sorrow. He walked slowly, stopped beside one boy. The boy's skin was pale. His lips trembled. He looked at Lincoln and tried to sit up. "No, son," Lincoln said gently. "Stay still." The boy whispered, "Did we win that day, sir?" Lincoln couldn't lie. He simply held the boy's hand. That night, Lincoln sat in his room, alone again. The window was open. Cold wind moved through the curtains. He knelt beside his bed, folded his hands, closed his eyes, and prayed. God, was this the right path? He spoke into the silence. Is freedom worth so much pain? No voice answered, only the sound of wind and his own heartbeat. He thought about the letters, about the mothers. He had once said, "This nation cannot live half slave and half free." But now he wondered, can it live at all? He stood up, looked at himself in the mirror. His face was thinner, lines deeper, hair grayer. He barely recognized the man he saw. But inside, the fire still burned. A knock came at the door. It was one of his guards. "Sir, a group of people is here, refugees from the South." Lincoln nodded. "Let them in." A few minutes later, they entered. A small group, maybe 6 or 7. Poor clothes, tired eyes. One woman carried a baby. An old man limped behind her. And then a child stepped forward. He looked about 6 years old. Thin legs, big eyes. He stared at Lincoln like he was a giant. The room was silent. The child walked up to him, stopped, and suddenly ran forward. He threw his arms around Lincoln's waist, buried his face in his coat. Lincoln froze. Then, slowly, he knelt down. The boy looked up. "Thank you," he whispered. Lincoln's eyes filled with tears. He pulled the child close, didn't say a word, just held him. And in that small moment, the war felt far away. There was no blood, no letters, no angry crowds, only a child and a promise kept. He looked at the mother. She nodded with quiet strength. "You freed us," she said. "We walked for days, but we are free now." Lincoln felt something shift in his chest. Not pride, not glory. Something simpler. Peace. He stood again. the child still held his hand, and he knew. The pain was real. The loss was deep. But freedom was real too. Later, he wrote in his journal, "I have seen what war does. I have touched the faces of the broken. But today, a child reminded me why we fight. Not for power, not for fame, but for that small word, freedom." Outside, the night was still dark, but in Lincoln's heart, a light had returned. Chapter 9. A Voice for All Time. The sky over Gettysburg was gray. Clouds hung low. The air was cold, still. No birds sang. People stood quietly on the field. Thousands had come. Mothers, fathers, soldiers, freedmen in worn coats, children holding small flags. They came to listen. They came to remember. They stood on the ground where so many had died. Abraham Lincoln stepped forward. He looked out at the crowd. He looked down at the soil beneath his boots. He knew what was under it. Blood. Bones. Names no one would ever know. He held his hat in one hand, a small paper in the other. The speech was short, only a few lines, but the meaning was deep. He looked up. The people waited. He cleared his throat and began. 77 years ago. His voice was soft, calm, but it carried. Each word clear as a bell. Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. The words moved through the crowd, gentle but powerful. Some looked down, some held hands, some closed their eyes. Lincoln continued, "Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure." He paused. The silence was full of meaning. You could hear the wind. You could feel the pain. He looked up at the sky. It had not changed, still gray, still heavy, but Lincoln kept speaking. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives, that that nation might live. People shifted. Some began to cry. Lincoln's voice did not rise. It stayed quiet, steady, but it reached into the hearts of everyone listening. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But, in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. He looked down again, not at the page, but at the dirt. The brave men living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it. Far above our poor power to add or detract. He felt the truth of those words. He believed them. This was not a speech to show power. It was a promise. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. His voice shook now, just slightly, but it did not break. He went on. It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. Eyes lifted, heads nodded, hearts opened. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. His voice grew stronger, not louder, but fuller, like a river after the rain. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. That this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. He stopped, folded the paper, and stepped back. The crowd said nothing. Not at first, not because they didn't understand, but because they did. They were too moved to speak. Some wiped away tears. Others stood very still, their hats pressed to their chests. The speech was short, only a few minutes. But in that moment, Lincoln was no longer just a man. He was a voice for all time. Not a king, not a soldier, but something more powerful. A servant of truth, a symbol of justice, a messenger of hope. As the people slowly began to leave, Lincoln stood alone. He looked again at the field. He thought of the men who had died there, and he whispered, "I hope I have done them justice." The sky remained gray, but something had changed. Not outside, inside. A spark had been lit, a promise made. That freedom, real freedom, would never be forgotten. Chapter 10. The Dream Lives On. The war is over. The guns are quiet. The soldiers are going home. The flags are waving in peace. And the chains? The chains are broken. In the South, slaves walk free. Some laugh, some cry. Some kneel in prayer. Fathers find their children. Wives hold their husbands. Old men raise their hands to the sky and whisper, "We are free." In Washington, the city celebrates. Men cheer in the streets. Women hang banners from windows. Children wave red, white, and blue. It is a new day. A hard journey has ended. Abraham Lincoln watches from the window of the White House. He smiles, but the smile is quiet, gentle, tired. His face is older now, his hair more gray, his eyes deeper than ever. He has carried this country through its darkest days. He has made enemies. He has lost friends. But he has kept his promise. The Union is whole again. The slaves are free. And yet, he is still a man. A man who feels, who hurts, who dreams. That evening, he holds his wife's hand. She looks at him and says, "Let's go out tonight, Abe." "You need to laugh." He nods. "Yes," he says softly. "Maybe just once, I can sit back and smile." They go to the theater. The lights are warm. The music is light. The crowd laughs and claps. Lincoln leans back in his chair. For the first time in many years, he feels peace. He turns to his wife. He laughs. Then he looks forward and sighs. A man moves in the shadows. He is behind Lincoln, silent, watching. He carries a small pistol. His heart is full of hate. He steps forward, raises the gun, and fires. Bang. The sound shakes the theater. People scream. Some stand, some freeze. Lincoln does not move. The man runs, jumps from the balcony, disappears into the night. Doctors rush to Lincoln. His wife cries out, "Abraham! Oh God, please!" But his eyes are closed. His body is still. They carry him from the theater. Crowds gather outside. No one speaks. Some fall to their knees. Some pray. Later that night, the president is gone. News spreads across the country. Lincoln is dead. Assassinated. Murdered. The nation cries from north to south, from farms to cities, from white homes and newly free black families. Tears fall for the man who gave them hope. But even in sorrow, something remains, something deep, something powerful, a dream. Not a dream of war, not a dream of power, a dream of freedom, justice, unity. In the days that follow, people light candles. They gather in churches. They march in silence. They say his name with love, with pride. Lincoln, a man once born in a log cabin, a man who read by firelight, a man who stood up when others stayed silent. He is gone. But his voice, his dream, lives on. In every child who learns they are free, in every soldier who fights for what is right, in every person who dares to believe in a better tomorrow. He once said, "That government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." And it hasn't. Because Abraham Lincoln was more than a president. He was a promise. And that promise still lives in us. The dream lives on.